so far.
Hey folks, it's Weaver here, after the fact. We accidentally filmed this episode for 2 hours, which is probably 3 times longer than we were intending to record, so we ended up having to split it into 2 parts. This is part 2, and as such, since we didn't realize we were going to have to split it into 2 parts at the time, it doesn't really have a regular intro, so we're just going to jump right into it.
Anyway, I think we need to kind of refocus. So, yeah, back to Kenna. All right. So, anyway, so what are your thoughts? Like, we know that you talk a lot of, I'm sorry, I have these goddamn hiccups and it like came at the worst time. And so, but I know you talk a lot about Jordan Peele and a lot about Black horror in general. So like, just dump. What are your thoughts? We want to hear.
I would also like to hear your thoughts specifically. I know you talked about this briefly in Primordium, but like you did a screening of Get Out at your PWI, and that was like a really bad experience.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to hear about that.
So I think, kind of just starting generally, I think one of the most groundbreaking things that I think Jordan Peele has been able to do as a Black filmmaker is he has, through like visual imagery and his very unique brand of storytelling, he has broken through this curse that I feel like so many Black creators get stuck in, where all of their work gets, and I don't want to say trivialized because I feel like that word has a negative connotation, but a lot of times Black creators' work kind of gets digested down to being about white supremacy or about racism, because that's the part that white people are able to identify. And so a lot of times, like the themes that we were talking about earlier of disassociation, or like Get Out also deals very heavily with a lot of like very specific Black fears that are related to whiteness, but are not necessarily about the fear of racism. Like a huge part of the reason why Jordan Peele wanted to use like therapy and the mom being a therapist and hypnotherapy as a method of bringing him under is because there is a lot of stigma about going to get therapy in the Black community, particularly if you're in a religious portion of the Black community. And so Jordan Peele I think he's one of the first Black filmmakers who's been able to like really break through that. Like even white critics got that Nope was not just about white supremacy. And I don't know if any of you have seen Nope, but
except Logan Paul.
Yeah. I've thought of nothing else.
I haven't seen it yet, but I want to.
Absolutely
I have seen it, yes.
Phenomenal. It's one of those movies that I think, one of the thoughts that I was having while watching it that almost made me laugh is it felt like a movie made specifically for Black content creators, because it's very much kind of like a movie about making movies. But really what it's about is it's about gazes, and it's about looking, and it's about how the way that we look at things changes those things. And specifically, it's about, this is something that Bell Hooks talks about a lot in her film theory, the oppositional gaze, and the fact that historically Black people have been denied the right to look, and that looking is something that Black people were historically punished for. And so the idea of looking and making eye contact and how that can be an act of aggression or perceived as such is a really huge theme with a lot of Jordan Peele's work, but particularly Nope. And that movie, the monster really is chasing spectacle. Like the thing that you are supposed to be afraid of, the thing that you are supposed to be reviled by in that movie isn't necessarily Jean Jacket, which is what they nicknamed the UFO, which I love. That's also the most insanely incredible design I've seen in a movie in years.
Jean
Jacket is inspired.
Incredibly excited to finally find
Also,
the thing is like
the
I couldn't even give
images
you
for the cowboy hat
context
as well. Yeah, you
the
just
cowboy hat was
the promo image, and also like I realized, side note before Kenna just doesn't stop talking, I also realized that without spoiling, I also realized, do you know who else had an identical cowboy hat to that character? It was their father.
Yeah, their father.
Yep. Yeah, their father had the same hat on. The same
Jordan
hat.
Peele knows how to draw visual connections like very few other directors. Genuinely from a filmmaking standpoint, very few directors are able to kind of put together a cohesive enough aesthetic and like image, like an imagery aesthetic that's able to connect things like that. Like Jordan Peele hands you all of the pieces without telling you what the movie's about, and it's my favorite thing about his work. But yeah, I think the difference in perspective in Black horror versus white horror is, again, it's a part of why Birth of a Nation is so key in the conversation about Black horror theory. Because one of the things that I noticed while watching Get Out with a predominantly white audience is the same thing that I noticed while watching Birth of a Nation with a predominantly white audience, is that me and my classmates were having two vastly different experiences, even though, like, even most of my classmates were like, probably the hardest I've ever laughed after a film screening. We finished Birth of a Nation, which, mind you, this movie's 4 hours long. So we have just spent 2 full days of class screening the most racist movie ever made. The lights come up. The movie like ends on a lynching and like the Klan being celebrated. So it's a real weird fucking energy in the room. That movie's finished. And so the light comes up. It's real quiet. And there's this dude who sit right next to me. And he was British. I have no idea. This man was from Rockville, Maryland, but he was British. And he goes, well, that wasn't very good, was it? And that was the only noise that got made in the room. Birth of a Nation. And the white guy next to him goes, yeah, that sucked. And that was it. That was the only conversation my class had.
Wow.
Because the bell, or not the bell, because we were in college, but like the lecture period ended and we all just left on that weird ass energy. But something that I was talking about with my professor, and something that he told me another Black student had told him before, was that watching Birth of a Nation in a theater with white people it's like a traumatizing experience, because you're sitting there and you have no way to know how much of it they agree with, how much of it they're buying into. A huge part of what that movie kicked off is the wave of like, based on a true story or like historical dramas being considered the Oscar standard. That's something we don't think about a lot, is how, because Birth of a Nation was one of the first Hollywood blockbusters and it was so well received by white people critically, like Woodrow Wilson screened it at the White House, it has set forth the standard for Oscar bait. Most of the things that are featured in Birth of a Nation are things that will get you an Academy Award. It's like Black trauma. That's the only way you're getting into the Academy Awards if you're a Black actor. It's historical dramas, war stories. Birth of a Nation encapsulates all those things. And then also the famous, most successful Hollywood formula is white guy succeeds in love and business, which is also essentially what Birth of a Nation is about. It's just about the business of lynching Black people.
Yeah, and also has the music, just not to interrupt, but it has the musical aspect too. It's one of the first movies to have synchronized sound, and it's a soundtrack, like that synchronized music that goes along with it. And it literally impacts how like soundtracks are made even today. Like it's hugely influential, even though it's a piece of shit movie.
Yeah, and that's the really funny thing, is that Birth of a Nation, in my humble opinion, this is a bit of a tangent, introduced the idea of using a soundtrack and then just didn't do it right, because they don't even use the best part of In the Hall of the Mountain King. I was floored. Like the most famous part, the like the big da 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 da. Like they don't use it. It's the best part of the whole damn song, and it's not even in the like. If you're gonna make me watch propaganda Civil War movies, can you at least
get the music right? Yeah. And you know that tradition of scoring comes from prior to when we had synchronized sound, they would show silent movies and then they would have live music. Like silent movies weren't actually silent. People don't understand that. Like when you see a silent movie, it wasn't actually silent. When you were in the theater, somebody was playing like an organ or something, and there were certain like cheat sheets that they would have with like pieces of music that, okay, for like a cave scene, play Hall in the Mountain King, and for this scene, if it's supposed to be scary, play this song. And so that's where we got some of those musical
I've done
things.
A lot of research into vaudeville and like theater, like theatrical history, especially like Black vaudeville. But I remember, and also the history of Atlanta and theaters in Atlanta. And I remember the screening of Birth of a Nation in Atlanta specifically. I just, it's not like super interesting here in this context, but I remember like learning specific things about like which Atlanta theaters screened it and like the response in the paper. So like it was interesting to see like that intersect with my area of research. But one thing I wanted to talk to Kenna about was something that I thought was interesting in Get Out was the way that people were sort of like snapped out of the sunken place by like seeing the light with the camera flash. I thought that was really fascinating, and it made me wonder, because when he first when the camera first flashed on like Lakeith Stanfield's character, who I'm fucking in love with, by the way. I have so much gender envy for Lakeith Stanfield.
His whole
Oh
vibe is
God!
excellent.
Yes.
Also,
Lack of
real?
sadism as
side
a
note,
person.
Darius from Atlanta is autistic.
Gender.
Both,
Yeah.
Also that. But like the idea that he's like, oh well, he's just a stoner, and it's like everyone in Atlanta smokes weed, but he's the only one that's like that. And it's the autism, baby. But no, when in the camera flashes and it like snaps Lakeith Stanfield's character out of it, Dre, Chris acts like surprised, like he didn't remember turning the flash on his camera, and I was wondering if that was like an intentional implication that Georgina, when she had been messing with his phone previously and like unplugged it from the charger, if she had turned the flash on. I wondered that, and if that was like an intentional clue. If like the white grandma in Georgina unplugged the phone, but Georgina, the like still present black person, had turned the flash on, you know, as like to like help him in the future.
I need to rewatch the movie. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be very interesting.
One of the things
Yeah.
that I think is so interesting about Get Out premise, and also its execution, is like one of the huge ways that Black horror distinguishes itself from white horror is the protagonist having a sense of agency. Because one of the biggest disconnects that gets created, and what Bell Hooks is really talking about with the oppositional gaze, is the fact that because Black people just walk around with a higher level of anxiety and a higher level of consciousness of their surroundings and how they're being perceived, when white people act the way they do in horror movies, it gets received entirely differently. Like I mentioned this in the Primordium chat, but something I think is very funny is that prior to this massive wave of Black horror we got, I feel like one of the biggest jokes Black people were making in pop culture was about how stupid white people are in horror movies. And that analysis of why would you go somewhere why are you trespassing in the first place? Why are you going somewhere you're not supposed to be and being surprised it ends well? That's the oppositional gaze. That's what Bell Hooks is talking about. It's the fact that because you walk around being Black and having a completely different set of experiences, when you receive a story that's not speaking to that experience, you don't see like the final girl in a horror movie as just a poor, sweet girl who got caught up in the wrong story and keeps making mistakes.
Like, well, why did she choose to be in that situation?
You're like, it's your fault for going down the hallway when there was a sign in blood saying, don't go down this hallway, you're gonna die.
The same thing, like playfully making fun of like white people who are like thrill seekers, like bungee jumpers or skydivers. It's like, you don't have enough fear in your life that you have to manufacture it. You have to go seeking it out just to feel something. Whereas we live in fear 24/7 and we don't need any more of it. We aren't going to. And so it was interesting that Get Out sort of sets that up where like you can tell that Chris knows something's up, but it's this societal pressure. Like the only reason like, you know, a Black man would do something that like, you know, instinctively he knows like this is probably going to be shit. It's because of like the peer pressure of like, well, this is my girlfriend's family. You know, like it's that extra sort of like social expectation of like, well, you know, people are gonna act weird if you know I don't go, then I'm gonna be the bad guy.
And the way that they play that up in the way that the characters, like for instance, when Chris first brings up the old lady unplugging his phone or whatever, and he's just like curious about it, and she's like, "Oh, I'll have to talk to her about that." And he's like, "Whoa, no, it's not that big a deal." Like he doesn't want to get this Black lady in trouble,
which is like one of many times that happens in that movie as well. Because I mean, they ran into a cop on the way there. And like that was a whole thing of like they run over the buck, et cetera, but like which by the way in layers, but like
they I want to hear Kenna talk about those layers also.
Yes, this is all me leading up to asking Kenna like a question. But like the double symbolism between like the Black man and the buck versus like the way that Rose's brother treats him and etc. And also the way that everybody
the buck
treats him
mounted on the wall to like kill the dad. That was yes, I love that.
Iconic. But also like there's one, that's that kind of like situation that sort of like, oh, it's just more effort than it's worth to say something is something that is brought up for the first and for some people the most obvious time in the movie, but not the last time, which is literally just don't talk to this cop, like I'm gonna just get out, I'm gonna do whatever he says, it's whatever. And then Rose, being the good white girlfriend ally, is like, no, I'm gonna stand up for you. Meanwhile, she eats her cereal separate from her milk to keep the colors and the white separate.
She stands up for him to stop the paper trail, because if the cop had written them a ticket, it would have been a paper trail. That's why she did that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole. She just didn't want the paper trail. Exactly.
Yeah.
My question is,
would you, right? It was a thing from when we were talking about Birth of the Nation, but like the intentional sort of like hyper awareness of being I forget exactly what it is. I'll ask you in a second when I remember. If I remember, I hope I remember. But sorry. In the meantime, Kenna, just do whatever it is you gotta like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think I don't know. I think one of the most interesting things about Black horror as a genre is that, much like Afrofuturism and a lot of other Black originated genres, it has a lot to do with the reclamation of identity. And one of the things that we talked about a lot when I was taking horror film classes in college, and one of the things that my professor would marvel over, is he was always so confused as to why most of his horror film classes were women, queer people, and the very few non-white people at our institution very frequently gravitated towards horror classes. And what is so interesting about that is that the alignment of the marginalized and the monster is something that stretches as far back as not just horror film, but horror stories and monsters go.
Even just fairy tales in general.
Yeah,
Frankenstein.
Fairy
tales. The whole point of Frankenstein was like, he was misunderstood and he wanted a family, and like Victor was like, fuck that, you're scary. And it's like, well, yeah, but you made him that way. Like,
yeah.
Right. Well, and also, like, historically, because horror has always come from the perspective of white wealthy people, a lot of times what white wealthy people feel are marginalized people. And so, like, one of the things that often gets lost when you're talking about vampire lore, and why so much of it ties back to them being weak to particularly Christian mythology, is that some of the most prevalent movie vampires, Dracula and Nosferatu, were specifically developed to be anti-Semitic stand-ins. Like Nosferatu and Dracula, those stories are entirely about the fear of foreigners and the fear of Jewish people taking economic control, and that kind of, like, a lot of times vampires get read
like
as fears of the bourgeoisie, and that's exactly, it's a lot of blood libel. It's a lot of there's also heavy alignment of like the lesbian vampire trope that comes out of the alignment of vampires kind of being like the sex symbols of the monster world, and queer people tend to be heavily sexualized. And so, you know, Birth of a Nation, America's first movie monster was Black people. You also see that in The Creature from the Black Lagoon. You see it in Candyman. And so a huge part of the reason that so many marginalized, queer, disabled, Black people, women gravitate towards monsters is because in a way we recognize that they're us. A lot of times in a horror movie,
that's how the outside world treats us and sees us. I was literally just trying to explain to my brother 2 days ago why gay people love Halloween so much.
Exactly.
Well, like,
so,
the villains
the
are
one time I can
coded.
look as weird as I want to, and it's encouraged. Two, it's the one time we kind of celebrate the villains. And I think, interestingly enough, one of the ways that horror kind of got off the beat, because the thing that always drives me nuts about horror is that, like, you look at 1968 Night of the Living Dead, it feels like horror is lining up to be like one of the most progressive genres, and then The Exorcist comes out, and that just goes down the toilet, because The Exorcist was just like purely courting middle class white Christian America. It's a very, like, the fear is like kind of about evil, but that evil is deliberately and inexplicably aligned with brown people. Like, I watched that movie for the first time, and the second it started in Iran, I was like, what the fuck are we doing?
Ancient Indian burial ground, anyone?
Exactly. It's the exact same
I don't even remember much about The Exorcist, but I do know it was the first horror movie I ever watched. I was probably like in elementary school, and my two older siblings that lived with us at the time like snuck into my room later that night to like whisper scary shit and like just like make scary noises outside the door just to freak me out so I couldn't sleep. And that was like my first horror experience. And so that's why I was like,
I didn't see
horror.
Yeah, I
first
didn't see
horror
The Exorcist till
experience
college.
when
and
I
like,
was
this is dumb.
when I was a little baby, my mother took me to the theater to see Jimmy Bones, and that's what that was. I was a tiny little baby. It's a black supernatural horror film. Snoop Dogg's in it, and all I remember
Already
is that
interested.
all I remember is that I went home, could not stop staring at all the dark corners, and I was like, I don't think this genre is for me. At that point, I was already traumatized enough by just being a child, and like having the environment that I was having as a child. But I was like, I don't think I like this genre very much. It's a little spooky. I don't think I want to do that.
Sidebar about Jimmy Bones. One of the things that I think is the most fun about Jimmy Bones is that he is very much like a black horror answer to a lot of super popular slasher villains in the 80s and 90s, like Freddy Krueger. I can't believe I just forgot all of their names. Jason from Friday the 13th. Like Jimmy
Michael
Bones
Myers.
was very much, yeah, very much meant to be one of those like distinctive horror villains who you look at and you're like, I would know him anywhere. I will fear that man for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I've carried that fear with me. It worked. And
Yeah.
I never tried to go back and watch it ever.
I know, it's crazy.
Now I know who Snoop Dogg is, and I can like I must have repressed the fact that it was Snoop Dogg, because I completely, like, I had to Google it to make sure that I was, because sometimes in my family we say Jimmy Jones instead for some reason, and so like I had to Google it just now to make sure, and I was like, oh, Snoop Dogg's in this movie. Meanwhile, it's the thing that like traumatized me as a little baby.
Completely unrelated, but once my mom was trying to once my mom was trying to tell my two older siblings that the ones in high school, that she's like, oh, I can come chaperone the school dance. She's like, I can cut a rug, I can drop it like it's hot. And they're like, no, that's not what that means. Don't ever say that again.
Oh my god. No, on the reference of like what Kenna was saying about how like a lot of these villains and stuff in horror are either like queer coded, or they are anti-Semitic, or they are like disabled. Like that speaks to, or all three. I was reading a book called Disfigured by I think Anne Ludick, and it was written by a woman she has cerebral palsy, so she's disabled, and she was talking about how like historically so many fairy tales, not even just horror stories, but just fairy tales in general, are designed to villainize the different, and specifically and most often to villainize the disabled. Like most of if you think about like a lot of the classic fairy tales, so much of it, like that bad guy or the person who is villainized in the narrative is lame, or they're deaf, or they can't speak, or they have a physical disability. And even now in a lot of horror movies, disfigured faces, or they walk with a limp, or they're in some way disabled either intellectually or physically. Like there's so much disability coding in fairy tales telling, and like the way that like things were, werewolves come back to like people having tuberculosis and not understanding what that meant, and like, oh, they look like they're like sucking blood because they're so sallow, their cheeks are narrow, and it's because they're dying of tuberculosis, but we didn't know that at the time. And it's just like
even the guy in Get Out that like buys the rights to Chris was a blind man, and I think that even though it was really resonant in the fact that Chris was a photographer, like it was relevant and it added to the story, it still like doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, like Crutches and Spice on TikTok talks about, the ugly laws. It used to be illegal for people with disabilities and like facial deformities to just exist in public because their mere existence was considered like disturbing the peace, and it was a sort of like forced isolation.
Or even just the alternative aesthetic, like the idea of punk. Like I made a video about this not too long ago. I was talking about how, isn't it funny how like if you watch like the old shows from like the 80s and 90s and stuff, you watch the Disney Channel, whatever, the bully always looks like a punk, right? Like black leather jacket and like a spiked collar or whatever. But in reality, it's like I have had much worse experiences from clean cut white guys named Chad than I have from like dudes who dress like that. Usually people who dress like that are chill.
Like the villain was the white, the villain literally was the white guy, and everybody was like, you know, Eddie Munson must be the serial killer because he wears black and plays D&D.
Okay. We're gonna have to. I was gonna suggest it before, after like in the sort of like Close Encounters like private Discord server that we have. Like yesterday, we kind of went off on a tangent about like fandom culture, and I brought up Stranger Things. So I would like to have it should be it's probably gonna be like a hyper focus thing that I go off of.
Yeah.
Yes, but
so much about
it's there. But okay, so I did this. It's just so like it's just because the villain is always the person that like it's always so shocking.
White guy.
No, it's always so shocking to audiences when the villain ends up being this like clean cut like middle class gung-ho American person. But it's like and no, exactly. It's like, and also like I think that they did like a really I was talking to my other partner, my arch nemesis the other day about like, why does everybody laugh when I say that? But like it's yeah, I know.
To follow up my partner with my arch nemesis, I know.
We've got like an enemies and lovers vibe going on. It's very nice. But so there's we were talking about the way that they she was talking about how happy she was that they didn't shy away from the Satanic Panic thing, or like how like I think intentional in a way that a lot of other folks wouldn't have been, at the very least, with Eddie Munson's character, who I've been able to think about little else since like that time of year. Like the entirety of my year has just been like thinking super deeply about like Eddie Munson's character as well. And it's literally just like I saw a take that Straw Hat Goofy had a couple takes that Straw Hat Goofy had responded to on TikTok about it was about how people who identified and came from the same world as Jason were like, well, you know, Jason's the hero of his story and it's not about race and you're thinking too much into it. And it's like, no, but it is. It's like Jason might not have been Billy. Jason might not have been Billy. But
not, like,
you know,
better.
it's still
it was just like a different aesthetic, but the same sentiment.
It is still layered. Like his violence towards Lucas is still violence towards Lucas.
Not
of all
Wildland
characters
on TikTok mentioned something about how like everybody loves Chrissy Cunningham, but it is still the perceived innocence of a white woman that it directly causes violence against a black man, because it's after
I'm just
Lucas,
over here having not seen Stranger Things.
It's after Lucas says like Chrissy went over to Eddie's house willingly because she was going to buy drugs. And he was like, no, Chrissy would never do that. How dare you? It was the perceived naivete, the perceived innocence, the desire for a white man to protect the honor of a white woman that caused the violence against a black man.
Yeah. And like the irreversible decision to be actively violent towards Lucas. And also I think that says something generally.
Like she was a child. Like she was
first off, Erica Sinclair, iconic, and also missed opportunity because a lot of people in the fandom don't talk enough about how much Eddie and Erica would have been BFFs. Like, have you seen that scene where like Eddie's like accepting her into Hellfire? They would have been BFFs. He was like so accepting after like doing his little putting on airs thing. Also, I love Erica's character, but like I think it's also and circling back because I'm gonna end this with a question for Kenna if I remember the question this time. Is like it's like I think it also says something. It says a lot about the ways in which like Lucas has this insane journey with conformity as the only black character, and like it's also very easy to see when you're coming at it from that lens why he makes the decisions that he makes, why he does and says the things that he does. Like I was going back, like I'm starting a rewatch of Stranger Things that's going slower than I would like it to, but like I was like, you know, looking back at Lucas in season 1 and the way that he regards Elle as this potential threat, the way that immediately he was the one who was like, Will's dead, we have to accept that. He is put in this position that none of the other kids are put in, of having to accept hard truths, right? Like in the, I saw something, I haven't fact checked it yet, but apparently like in season 1, the Duffer Brothers or the writers originally had it so that at like one point, like Lucas would have been called a slur. And also side note, I would have, or had slurs like thrown at him. And also I would like there to be a lot more payoff for Lucas after all of the violence that
we see displayed towards him. But speaking back on violence is like, my thing is like the conformity, the conditional acceptance of assimilation of people that have been othered, right? Is something that's very interesting, especially for characters in any kind of like horror, supernatural kind of whatever, as something that is just that, is conditional, right? Like Lucas is accepted by Jason conditionally, right? Like and so often in media we see that this is, and also that adds a layer of horror to characters like Lucas, because you are knowing that by going against this thing you are inviting violence into your life in a way that that will not be erased, and in a way that's not like, once you are assimilate and then betray the folks that are allowing you to assimilate, it is not a violence that you can get away from. It sticks with you for the rest of your life.
So we are going to, continue to promote our various social platforms. Those are all going to be in the description. Also, I'm going to take this moment to plug Awesome Socks Club. It is a product by my mutual Hank Green of the Green Brothers, and it's the whole purpose of it is to sell these sock subscriptions, and it's only open, and it's only
Casual
the
flex.
sign up window is only open for a limited period of time, but you can sign up for like a year's worth of, it's like a sock subscription service. All of the socks are designed by various artists, and those artists are paid, and all of the money, the profit, goes towards Sierra Leone and helping make childhood mortality rates, like lower them, like help with maternal care in Sierra Leone. And so it's a really cool, solid ethical project that I've worked with before, and I have a link which I'll put in the description if I remember to do so, which is like an affiliate link, so it does help me out a little bit, but it also helps the good cause, and you can go and get socks, and the socks really are very nice, very comfortable socks. So I'd like to plug that in.
And also something that we didn't mention last time is that if you are listening and you're like, I have a business and I want to advertise on this cool podcast, shoot us an email at closeencountersoftheblurredkind@gmail.com.
And we will put that in this description as well, the contact us
absolutely.
email.
Kenna, do you have anything to promote? Tell us about your Patreon, if you have any projects coming up.
Oh, no, I don't really have anything going on. I'm kind of on an official hiatus, I guess. I'm kind of trying to, slow it down, take a break, figure out my real life. But I do have a Patreon. My current TikTok account, because I just real low key deactivated at 250K and was like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. If you're looking for me, I am now at Mouse Abolition. I'm also Mouse Abolition on Twitter. And I don't remember my Instagram handle, but if you find my TikTok, you can find that. I have a link tree in the TikTok account, so I just kind of let that speak for it. I don't explain my handles anymore. I just because I'm not trying to grow. I'm not trying to promote.
Weaver, do you have anything to...
I want to tell everybody about Primordium again. Currently, Primordium is just once a week on Tuesdays, and the co-hosts rotate choosing the readings. We do a read aloud around 6:30 Eastern Standard Time on my friend Madeline's Twitch channel, The Eclectic Library. And that read aloud is open to everybody. But if you would like to participate in the group discussion in the Primordium Discord server, all you got to do is subscribe to one of us on Patreon. Parker, did you have anything to promote?
Oh, yeah.
last but not least.
Patreon and YouTube are my primary things. YouTube, support the Patreon so that I have more stuff on YouTube so I don't have to work as much in my day-to-day. The Patreon has exclusive, in case people don't know, I'm also a musician. I have demos and other projects and stuff up on Spotify, SoundCloud, Tidal, and all other forms of listening to things. My stage name for that is Witch Hazel, but I have song demos for things that I haven't released yet at all stages of production that are up on Patreon. My Patreon is HumbleTortoise. My YouTube is HumbleTortoise. Just go and support that.
Kenna, for me, I like, first off, I didn't actually know until earlier this week that Night of the Living Dead was black horror. I had heard about it. I knew that it was like a really, really like popular zombie movie. I had no idea until I saw literally like the part of the movie like at the end where he's shot. Like, oh right, it was because I watched a short clip of Jordan Peele discussing that versus like his ending in Get Out.
Yeah, how it was inspired. I remember him saying that.
Yeah, and like I think there's something to be said about like I've been doing poetry professionally for like almost a decade now, a little bit over a decade now, and like and so like my brain always goes to, there's a style of poetry that's an erasure poem, and so you take a poem that already exists or any piece of text that exists and you black it out until its meaning is completely changed. How do you think that the horror genre has made an erasure poem of the Black experience, and more specifically, how do you think, by reclaiming those blacked out spaces, modern and, like, what would you like to see made spectacle by by Black professionals in the horror industry? Like, what's happening now that you enjoy? What would you like to see more of? Like, just can you speak on that at all?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think one of the things that's most interesting about Black horror is that it's one of the few few art movements led by Black people that has been able to maintain mainstream popularity without kind of having to assimilate to whiteness. Like, I genuinely feel as Jordan Peele's filmography goes on, he is talking less and less to a white audience. Like, most white people I know love Get Out and then like didn't really get Us or Nope. And it's because like Get Out is a movie about the fear of whiteness and the danger that whiteness poses to Black people, and white people being able to have that frame of reference and that character they relate to is what allows them to understand that film so much better. It's also why a lot of times his movies, when white people are analyzing them, get boiled down to being about white supremacy. Professional critics don't do that a whole lot. People do it in my comments all the time, and it always drives me nuts. But I think a part of the reason why that's the case, and it's one of those things where it's a very double-edged sword, is because at the end of the day, Black horror still allows white mainstream audiences to see Black people and roles and stories that line up with what we've done before. Black horror is, by virtue of being Black horror, a lot of brutalization. It's a lot of trauma. It's a lot of dealing with the anxiety and the hardships of being Black. And even if that's told through allegory, it's still a very different experience to watch as a Black person than it is as a white person. And so I think one of the things that Black horror, like I want to see come out of Black horror, is not necessarily Black horror moving in any one particular genre. I would love to see Black horror kind of instill the idea in white people's minds that we have always been here, creating things in our own way, and that these things all have their own value. Like, I would love to see Afrofuturism and Afro-fantasy hit, like, the mainstream appreciation and acclaim that Black horror is hitting. Because Black horror, because you're talking about the things that scare you, and because you're dealing with fear, Black horror is very rarely uplifting or empowering. A lot of times it functions more as a form of catharsis. Like, I would not say that I walked away from Get Out or Us or Nope. Nope is a little bit of a different story because that's literally about how Keke Palmer uses the power of Black filmmaking to save her family's farm. So Nope is definitely a little bit different. And just tangentially, I think watching Jordan Peele become more conscious of how particularly Black women are represented in his films has been incredibly wonderful to see, because that's one of my biggest complaints about Spike Lee as a director, is that Black women always fulfill a very specific role in his films, and it's one that is meant to be subversive, but once, like, if you're creating tropes for anybody in your movies, or you're leaning out as subversive, like, Spike Lee is always very much trying to make the point that this black woman has been saying the thing the whole time, the thing we should all be paying attention to the whole time, but nobody's listening to her because she's a little bit of a nag. Like, that's every black woman in a Spike Lee movie. And with Jordan Peele, I think you see in the first movie, Georgina is one of the only black characters who, like, doesn't get a chance to really break out of her being coagulant. And she's the one who gets left behind. And it's very much meant to serve as, like, a very emotional moment for Chris. You know, he has that moment of seeing the deer left on the side of the road to die like his mom did. He's been leaving Georgina behind is difficult for that exact same reason. But at the end of the day, you are still using a black man to service the emotional or a black woman to service the emotional development of a black man's story.
Yeah.
And so him coming out with Us right after that, which is all about Lupita Nyong'o and is all about her performance and her story and that fear of kind of knowing you could be replaced at any second and that who you are doesn't really have intrinsic value. It's the space that you fill. To me, that was everything I needed to know about how Jordan Peele was growing and thinking as an artist.
And I don't know, like, any white person who got Us appropriately. Like, every white person's take on Us has been, like, so bad, and, like, they've missed.
They're just like, it's capitalism.
I know. I don't know if you guys ever watched, like, film theory, like Matt Pat or whatever. Like, sometimes I just watch it just to make fun of it because he's such a bad critic. But anyway, he talks about, when he talks about Us, he's like, the secret of Us is that, like, it's about consumerism, and, like, nobody could tell the difference between, like, Adelaide and, like, when she was the unspoken. And it's like, no, they could tell the difference. Like, she was different when she came back. That's not the point. The point is that there was no difference. Like, it is you are the same as these other people, the tethered, and so you can switch places and have a radically different experience because you're put in a different context. It's not that, anybody is just replaceable. It's that, there are people who live in a radically different context than other people, and that is the only thing that separates them.
With Us, that was one of the things that I was like, this looks like it's gonna freak me the hell out. I don't want to see it. I need to support Jordan Peele so that more things like this are made. And so I went to go see it, and it was like, after we got out of it, we were having, cause Robin's also like a really, really big, like film buff. And so we did have a lot of questions about, or not questions, but we were having a lot of commentary, about the ways that capitalism can be applied to it. But the thing that it's the context and it's the lack of experience, because it's like, even if you do look at it through a capitalist lens, if you're white, you're still not going to get it, because if it's capitalism is inherently, like so many other things, if you are not white, it is a completely different experience. If you want to say that that Us is its main like the villain is capitalism, it's like, okay, cool, but it's capitalism while being a black woman, which is a completely different experience. Also, on that, I wrote down another question because I did have to take notes. Thinking back, this is something that you recently brought up again, but so thinking back to trauma being made a spectacle by Black artists in music and in media. Kenna, do you think it's possible to create media as a Black American or a Black person in Western society through a lens that is not intrinsically and unavoidably and inevitably tied to trauma? Like, as a Black creator.
Question.
Yeah. I mean, I am generally of the opinion that, I kind of feel the same way about that question as I do when people bring up the idea of a female gaze, which the way that, like, male versus female gaze and what the female gaze actually means in a film context has been
understand.
No, not remotely. I stopped dressing for the female gaze. Like, stop, please.
That's what it means. That's not what that means. But the thing about a female gaze and the thing about the male gaze is really what's being described with the male gaze is that men have an ability to create movies without having to cow down to systems of oppression. That's literally what it is. And nobody else has that right. That's what allows the male gaze to exist. If men were answering to, like, women who were in studio production positions, that upskirting shot probably wouldn't fly. Like, that's essentially the idea behind the male gaze. And so I definitely think that there is a world where it is possible to be a Black filmmaker who is not making film and art that ties back in any way to trauma, but I don't think we're going to see it until racism goes away is the really unfortunate thing. I think a lot of times people forget how inherently political art is, not just in terms of like film historically has been used to push a dozen political agendas, but also just like artists are generally people who are specifically trying to respond to the cultural zeitgeist that they are living through. One of my favorite things about the movie Get Out is not just that the movie was made, but how intentional that movie is in the way that it was made. It was, similarly with Night of the Living Dead, Jordan Peele was considering having Chris be arrested. He was going to have it actually be cop cars, and cops were going to pull off, and cops were going to pull up, and he was either going to be arrested or shot and blamed for the death of, I just forgot their names, the white people.
Armitage.
I knew it was something ridiculous like that. White people last names are so funny. But a huge part of the reason why he decided to have Chris survive the end of that movie is because ultimately he decided that the most subversive thing you could do with a black man in a horror movie is have him survive. Yeah. And specifically to have him be saved by a member of the community. I think that's the most revolutionary thing about the ending of Get Out is that like Rod goes to the cops. Even the black cops don't take him seriously. And so what saves Chris is not just another black person. It's another black person who is in community with him, because the fear of like not all skin folk are kinfolk is a massive, massive theme in Get Out. Yes. And so I think the fact that Jordan Peele was able to sit down and be like, is what my community really needs to see more black people dying is like it's interesting, because even when you are making the choice not to inflict more violence on a black character, that is still a choice being driven by black trauma. Just because you
as you're
really
watching it, you're thinking, when you see the police lights, you're like, I know when I was just like, oh shit, oh god.
You're thinking, I know how this goes. Yeah, exactly.
When I saw Get Out, I was lucky enough that I saw it in a it's one of the reason why I'm so obsessed with this movie, as well as so many other people, is because Get Out is something that like the movie changes depending on your experience and the experience of the people around you. That's insane. I love that so much. The fact that it is hyper subjective and it calls into it really like puts under a microscope the subjectivity and the internal biases of yourself and also the people around you, to the point where the movie changes like the way that Coraline is either a horror or an adventure depending on your age. That's what Get Out is depending on your race, and it's amazing. And so I was lucky enough, I saw Get Out also in theaters. Gotta support the black dollar, but I saw Get Out with my partner again, and it was specifically, we were in a mixed audience in the middle of New York City. So it was actually to kind of speed run how the audience handled it. There was a interracial couple. There was a white girl and a black guy who walked in holding hands.
That's bold. At the end, bold to go to that movie.
At the end of and it was like within the first week of it coming out, right? So maybe they weren't prepared. They walked in, they were holding hands, we passed by them, they were like all lovey-dovey. At the end of the movie, we walked out at the same time. He was not speaking to her. And I know my partner said that, halfway through, also on the subway home with my friend and my partner, I was like, there were like white tourists across the subway from us, and I was like, I'm gonna avoid this eye contact right now, because I'm a little spooked. Also, just because I had now. Yeah, but also like I had also realized that are you guys aware of the cookbook called The Delectable Negro?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So it's a cookbook on how to make black people delicious in the kitchen, basically. That literally it's a book on cannibalizing black people. I have not stopped thinking about it since I found out that it was a thing. Also, Delectable.
How can you?
I think you can still buy it on Amazon. Yeah.
No, it's available on Amazon, I believe. Like it's fucking like it's Noma. But anyway, basically like my partner, while they were sitting in front of us, that couple, and halfway through the movie, like apparently he had like taken her hand off of his and kind of like leaned away from her, which I think is hilarious. But it's also like it's just I was able to see in real time at the end of it, and I'm sure like anybody else who had a generally like mixed theater and like a generally like I don't want to say integrated area, but I can't think of another word. But yeah, like, you know, it's the middle of New York City. It's like a Friday or Saturday night. Like there's a bunch of like folks from all different backgrounds in this theater. At the end of that movie, when the sirens went off, the majority of the people there, like all of the people of color, of which there were many, thank God, we gasped. We were like, oh no. I'm very loud in movie theaters. I'm that person that does the funny commentary. But I was like,
another stereotype about Black people I like to think
about. Yeah.
That's,
where the term peanut gallery comes from.
At one point. But yeah, like,
because the upper balcony
not
in
the George
theaters,
Washington Carver.
No, the upper balcony in theaters was where all the Black people sat, and it was like stereotypical that they like ate peanuts as snacks during when they went to the theater, and they were like stereotyped as like very loud and rowdy. So that's where the peanut gallery. Yeah.
Everything is racist.
Stereotypes about like people in this about Black people in this country are just the funniest things, because it's like we'll just be doing something and people will be like, yeah, I bet you do sit down, all you Black people, you just love to sit down. And then 60 years later there's like we're called sitters for no reason, and it's like where did that like that's how that works.
This is like a completely opposite direction, and I know we really need to wrap up because Kenna was like, I need to go at 3. But I've been reading a book called The Golden Thread, How Fabric Shaped the World. And there's a chapter on cotton. And something that is interesting is that white countries were selling cotton fabric to Africans in exchange for slaves. They were selling cotton fabric to the Africans. And so like what we consider African print fabrics, like the wax prints, that is not from Africa. That is from the Netherlands. The Dutch colonized Indonesia, and Indonesian people had like pioneered batik. And so the Dutch were like, oh, we can do like this artificial mass-produced batik, but the Indonesians were like, well, we don't want that. We want our own stuff. But the like Nigerian and like West African people that like the Dutch East India Trading Company or whatever had been employing were like, hey, we like those bright colors, but we want you to do them in like the designs we like. And so the Netherlands started producing this like wax print fabric for the West African market, and it was very like loud, bright colors, very based on like what Africans were into. Now on the other side of the pond, there was this, slaves were really only allowed to wear like very like ugly, like very plain clothes. And whenever they had the ability, they were drawn to individuality, to bright colors. Like any chance they got, they'd put like clashing colors together. And the white people around them were like, oh, they have no sense of fashion. This comes out of nowhere. They, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, meanwhile, on the other side of the world, their cousins, the West Africans, were like, culturally, we value bright colors. That is something that we enjoy. That is something that is baked into our culture. And then on the other side of the world, they're like, why do these slaves keep wearing bright, garish colors that don't go together? It must be a mystery. Like,
which is also so interesting because that's still like I remember one of the first times when I was younger, I used to, like me and my siblings would just get like, we're all very close in age, so all of us would like just get clothes at the same time. It's like, yeah, one of y'all got a new shirt, all of you guys have a new shirt, and so we used to just have like, it was a Powerpuff thing kind of going on, because it's like, you're blue, you're green, you're yellow, or like you're orange, you're pink, you're red today. And I remember this one time I had visited family, and it was family that I hadn't met before. I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I was wearing this like bright orange shirt, and like I'm a brown skinned person, generally speaking, that's how I identify. And like I remember one of my aunts or something. When you have enough family, it's everybody is an aunt or something. But one of my aunts or something just looked at me while I was like playing around with like my younger sisters in the sun in like the Midwest, and they were like, and it was like this old dark skinned Black woman from like the South/Midwest, and she was like, I thought we were too dark to wear bright colors. That orange looks really nice on you. And that was the first time that I had ever encountered the stigma of like dark people shouldn't be wearing bright colors, which is a huge thing. Like a lot of especially with Lupita Nyong'o, like a lot of people have been like, what is she doing wearing that like powder pink? But like it looks good on us is the thing as well.
Like bright colors look amazing on dark skin.
They look so good.
Like colored hair, like bright pink hair on a dark skinned person.
100%. I'm not the best example because all my whole closet's like black, green, a different shade of green. I have 3 white shirts, 2 of them I wear to the gym. Like I'm not a great example of like the bright colors, but like I have a color that I commit to at the very least, and I can acknowledge like now that like that and also I think that I mean, going back to bring it back to spectacle, that's also a thing that's happened a lot in the Black community, even outside of horror. But also like, is it possible, like as with society as we know it, to do anything that makes us happy that's not tied to trauma in some way as a Black person in like Western society? Because even wearing bright colors is tied to that, the hyper-awareness of self, 1, and 2. The hyper-awareness of self, the hyper-awareness of exposing yourself to violence because you are being othered more than you already were.
Noticeable instead of blending in, yeah.
Exactly, which is the myth as well, which perpetuates and like comes from the myth that if we are very, very good Negroes, we're not going to be hated by other folks. It's like there's nothing that's going to make my skin an acceptable shade to somebody with an internalized bias, even if they don't want to admit it. You know, like it's just the act of existing is spectacle, which is interesting when you relate it to trauma in Western society. I'm sorry, y'all activated my hyper-focus this episode.
We've got to be wrapping up, but I think the closing message for this episode is be the monster everyone already thinks you are. Be the monster.
Be a monster.
Embrace
Yeah.
it.
Be the monster.
Yes.
That's today's slogan.
Be the monster.
And also about zombies. Oh, and about zombies, circling back to zombies, just as a closing thing, because this was a question I wanted to ask Kenna anyway. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you were saying about how white people don't do zombies correctly and how zombies are supposed to be Black? I know that we're trying to, as like a TLDR, quick and dirty about that.
The quick and dirty of zombies are supposed to be Black is that zombies with an I, because I always distinguish between zombies with an I and zombies with an IE, because that's
they come from Haiti.
So, and people argue all the time that like zombies can't possibly be appropriated because zombie folklore has taken off so far in movies, it's its own thing. No, it's not, because the way that zombies came to the silver screen, to horror movies, is through a movie called White Zombie. And in the movie White Zombie, they actually do acknowledge that zombies originate in Haitian folklore. It's Bela Lugosi, who is like, you know, it's classic horror if Bela Lugosi's in it. That's Dracula. Yeah. He's in like a million different classic horror movies. But he plays like a evil voodoo hypnotist. And the way that typical Haitian zombies were created is it was basically you had like, I'm going to pronounce this word wrong because I've only ever read it, but you had a somnambulist, like somebody who was able to put people into a kind of trance-like state, and they would then use them for labor. And so these people would go missing, and loved ones would see this loved one who was thought to be dead tilling somebody else's field. And that's where the idea of a zombie comes from. And so in the movie White Zombie, you have Bela Lugosi, our evil voodoo doctor, who has kind of created this process to turn people into zombies. And it's a deeply weird, fucked up movie. Like, it's basically about this white couple who goes to visit him for, I can't even remember why. And basically, like, this guy wants to marry his girlfriend, so he has the evil voodoo doctor, like, turn her into a zombie so he can better control her. And it turns out that this is something that he has been doing to like all of his enemies and people who cross him, is turning them into zombies and keeping them under his control. And so one of the really funny things about Night of the Living Dead is that it's called Night of the Living Dead and not something zombie, because George Romero wasn't really trying to do a zombie movie.
He was trying
with
to
that
do
film.
like a different, because zombies he acknowledged was like a different thing already, but everybody just assumed.
Exactly, and so it became what pushed this. I refer to them as shamblers because there's a lot of like zombies who run in modern media now, but the concept of
Romero's,
the kind of Romero's, and I don't know. I think it's so funny that they get called that because he didn't even want them to be zombies. But yeah, the word zombie does not actually get used in George Romero's films until the second one, which is Dawn of the Dead, which is 100% about consumerism. That's part of the reason why I get so mad when people say Us is just about consumerism. It's because, like, if you want, like, George Romero did that already. Yeah. That's the reason why Jordan Peele wanted to make it more than that. Like, it takes place in a mall. It's very on the nose.
I was gonna say real quick that because like the zombies of Haitian folklore are so tied to this like ancestral black fear of being forced to do labor against your will, I think in some regards we can consider Get Out to be a zombie movie.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's a body snatching movie, but it's the same kind of concept. Yeah, in the original sense of
like, the Haitian zombies. That's really interesting. That I hadn't even considered that.
It's also why some of the only zombies I rock with are Korean zombies. Like, I love any zombies, but when you're talking about, like, when it comes to, like, an actual analytical execution of zombies, I think Korean film and Korean cinema is the closest to, like, a tried and true representation of zombies that we've seen thus far, just because Black people don't have that kind of, like, creative control here in America. In Korea, you're talking about a more, like, unified population in terms of race. But Korean zombies have everything to do with what is one of the big pillars of fear in Haitian zombies, which is the loss of agency and an inability to decide for yourself what you want to do. It's definitely a big thing that's hit on in Train to Busan, which is one of my favorite zombie movies of all time. Like, those zombies don't even have object permanence. They have no idea what they're doing. And one of the most heartbreaking scenes in that entire movie is you follow this pair of, like, elderly sisters. And eventually one of them turns into a zombie. And there's a scene where the sister is looking at her zombified sister through the clear window of the train. And you can just see that there's nothing behind the eyes. She's not even really looking at her. It's just somebody completely gone. And there's a series called All of Us Are Dead that, like, blatantly is trying to, like, kind of copy and paste the zombies from Train to Busan. Like, there's literally a scene where, because it takes place in a high school, one of the characters looks out the window, sees zombies, like, eating his classmates, and he turns back to his friends and he's like, guys, it's Train to Busan. And that's
at least it's self-aware. Exactly. That's what it was doing.
But in that series, zombieism is very much used as an allegory for adolescence. And specifically, one of the recent events that happened in South Korea that people brought up a lot when talking about this project is there was a ferry incident where basically there was a group of students who were on a ferry that was sinking, and the adults and the crew all abandoned ship, and a lot of these kids died because they were ordered to stay put in their rooms, and they listened because there's a very heavy expectation of obedience that we put on adolescents and youth. And so one of the big themes in All of Us Are Dead is that the teachers are useless. Like, one of the first things you see happen in All of Us Are Dead is one of the teachers has been bitten and he locks himself in with a room full of students, knowing he's a danger to all of them because he wants to save his own skin. The principal spends most of his time hiding under his desk. There's very few teachers. The outbreak actually starts because of their chemistry teacher. Their chemistry teacher is trying to, like, engineer some type of thing to make his son, who keeps getting bullied, more aggressive, and it ends up becoming a zombie virus. And so it's like, by trying to push this toxic masculine identity onto his kid, this teacher poisons an entire school and causes an entire zombie outbreak. And one of the things that happens when the teenagers become zombies is because there's a part where a character who you've been with for a while starts to turn into a zombie. Their perception of the world around them changes completely. It's like, this kid has been best friends with one of the other members of the survivor group for forever. They're best friends. He's like the most good-natured, loving, welcoming, tries to make everybody feel at home character. And as he's turning, he starts saying things like, why are you all laughing at me? Why are you all saying these things? And he's hearing all kinds of insults in his friends' voices, and you're seeing their faces become warped. And it's like that teenage fear of becoming the outsider. But becoming the outsider in a zombie movie means you're dead. Yeah, it's devastating. All of Us Are Dead is one of the best pieces of zombie media I've seen in a long time, and I know that because it made me feel sick to my stomach. Oh my god.
Jesus. Well,
Okay.
on that wonderful note,
I'm gonna circle back to Be the Monster Everybody Thinks You Are, because that's like a vaguely happy note.
Yes.
That is also the summary of All of Us Are Dead, is that you find out that there are some zombies who are able to maintain agency throughout this aggressive state. And so be the monster.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining us. I'm gonna just say, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And don't forget to check us out on the podcatcher of your choice if you want to listen to us on the go. And if you are podcast listeners, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. The reviews are really going to help us during these first few weeks. And if you're a podcast listener, be sure to check us out on YouTube, because there's a lot of cool graphics. You get to see all our funny faces. And if you'd like to support us more directly, again, you can become one of our Patreon patrons. Those links are in the description. And again, if you'd like to inquire about being a sponsor, shoot us an email at closeencountersoftheblurredkind@gmail.com. Finally, thank you to Jhariah for the use of the song Enter, A Beginner's Guide to Faking Your Death. What a fitting song title, as the intro and outro to our show. All right, everybody, stay blurty.
Stay blurty.